Hi everyone, Simon from Horoma Studio. Today I wanted to talk about architecture school because they suck. No, they don't. They do. No, but it's the last video of the year, and so I thought I could do something a little bit original and talk about basically this idea of like, does going to architecture school help in if you want to do archviz later on? So yep, let's find out. So I've divided the video in like 4 smaller sections spanning reasons why maybe going to architecture school, could be worthwhile in regards to going into the archviz sector afterwards. Normally, all architecture school in the world will cover these like the topics to a certain extent, but generally it's common also that each school will have like a certain core and focus on some topics. If you don't, like if the sort of school curriculum that you have really doesn't touch on one of these, I would suggest not going to that school because it's a bit weird. So yeah, we'll go from the least important to the most important category, I think, starting with basically category 1, technical knowledge. So technical knowledge is kind of straightforward and is actually very important at the same time, but it's the most basic in the sense that you can really learn it very quickly. What I mean by technical knowledge is one thing first that you might have is also like first the idea of like learning softwares, basically all this sort of like SketchUp, AutoCAD, 3ds Max and all that stuff you can, or like Rhino and whatever, you can learn them there and you will learn them at some point. You will not learn them to a very high degree, but you'll at least have like a basic understanding and you might have some sort of understanding of what are the actual software that you might want to push a bit further in order to get like better at it. Another thing that is very important and that here is very let's call it like a fundamental is the idea of being able to read a plan or a section or whatever, like 2D documents. This is something that is very fun because I don't hire people, but I have some friends that have like actual studios, and they were very like astonished to sometimes hire people that didn't have any architectural background, and they would sort of expect them to be able to still read like some sort of 2D documents, and they actually were completely incapable of learning like a 2D plan or a 2D section of a project, which can be very problematic because sometimes client will send those, or sometimes even you will just have those type of documents and need to model the 3D from there, which is kind of the worst case scenario if you don't really know how to read a plan. So this is quite important. Another thing as well is that you'll start learning sort of like the basics of architecture so that you can fix things easily, like knowing like what's the height of a balustrade, how does a stair look like, and how is it supposed to be like calculated, etc., because you can quickly fix models if they're wrong. Another thing also is to actually have an understanding of how things work constructively, because this is something that you will have to learn there. And this is something that you very quickly notice in images that are done by people that have zero construction knowledge, where they start like putting together beams and posts in ways that don't make sense, or they start like actually modeling to a very small degree like details, but those details are completely wrong in terms of construction. So any architect that would look at these would be like, what the fuck is this? But at the same time, people that only have archviz basic knowledge will be like, oh, this looks nice, the texture is nice, but it actually doesn't make sense for the people they're done for. So it's a bit of a weird situation to be in. Also, one thing that is interesting and that I've noticed several times is that once you start having this sort of like technical knowledge, you can use it to solve issues that your client might have, because I personally work a lot with competitions, like on competitions, and the tight deadlines means that your client will not always be able to solve everything. And the thing is that when you do, when you place your camera and start like doing images, you might be focusing on something where there are like details that appear that are not solved by your client. And while ideally your client will be able to solve them and will have time to, sometimes you have to propose options. And those options, you can only know them by having like a decent architectural knowledge and being able to say like, maybe we can solve this by aligning this with that, or like having this type of detail or having this type of material, etc. So this is something that is actually very valuable for your client, because you take some work off of them so that they can focus on more important things. Also, one final thing I think regarding technical knowledge and like this idea of like actually understanding how things work is that then you have this ability to receive a model from a client and be able to detail it better, because it's very rare that your client will send you something that is like modeled properly to the extent that you might need for your image. And it's still very important for your image to be working to sometimes have like a decent level of details, whether it's in the foreground or it's in the actual like project where there's like a certain type of cladding, etc. And if you don't know how they actually work and how it's supposed to be put into place on site, you might not be able to actually model it properly, which can become a problem in the overall quality of your renderings. On to category 2. Category 2 is a little bit distinct and different and highly subjective, I would say, because the one main point I would say is this idea of like good taste, which is pretty subjective, we might imagine. But the thing is that there will always be this idea of like, when you come out of school, basically you have this sort of like new understanding of how things look and how good things look, basically. And in the same way that you will be able with like experience to identify what is a good image and what is a bad image, when you come out of school, you should be able to understand what is a good project and what is a bad project, or like how actually, if you're even a better architect, to how to solve the problems and make a bad project into a good project. So this is something that I've encountered and that I understand more and more, is that there's a very big parallel between architectural projects and illustration projects, if I may say, when you do like actual renderings of an image. And because images are basically projects in themselves. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And it's sometimes the foundations that don't work. And I think when you have like good fundamentals in architecture, you actually start to understand better the fundamentals of an image and how composition work, etc. Because in the same way that you will be able to identify what is a bad plan and what is a good plan, what is a good section, what is a bad section, you might be able to actually visually be able to see or conceptually see what are the good and bad things happening in the images that you're creating, which is something very important, I think, if you want to do like proper images and successful ones. Also, one thing in terms of artistic and conceptual knowledge, I think that is very important with school, is that you're going to be exposed to a varied spectrum of like knowledge and topics and opinions, if I may say, that you might not encounter by yourself. This is actually one of the big drawback of social medias, is that the more you like stuff that you like, the more the algorithm are going to feed you with the exact same stuff over and over again, to the point where your feed actually becomes extremely boring by actually feeding you with the same image over and over again. Whereas in architecture school, or in any school for that matter, there's actually this sort of like added value of showing you completely different stuff and things that you might not encounter by yourself and that you might not really want to dig into. And having someone showing you stuff, explaining you why it's important and why it's interesting and how it relates to the sort of like bigger picture can actually help you in taking completely different mediums and like resources as references for your work later on, which is very valuable, I think, later down the road. We can now look at category 3, which is more regarding practice and understanding. So by practice and understanding, what I mean is basically really understanding how architects work. So here it's more like having a better understanding of the whole business management, pricing, etc. Because what is interesting is that throughout architecture, like your curriculum of like 5 or 6 years, depending on where you live, you will end up doing like internships. And internships are very valuable because you will have like first-hand look at how things work. And therefore you will be able to, as I said, like understand how things work, understand how architects work, understand how they think, understand what they think about, how they put together like a project, what are the type of people that are put together in a team and how they work together, the type of hours they do, etc. Which is very interesting because, for instance, I know that there are a lot of people that sometimes get very annoyed, let's say, at architects during competitions because architects are asking for a lot of changes very late in the process. And the thing is that if you worked not even like just a month in an architecture firm doing competitions, you will know what is their workflow, and then you would not be astonished that they actually ask you to change sometimes major things in your model like 3 or 4 days before the deadline, because this is how things can be done sometimes. So having this sort of understanding is quite nice and I think important, and sort of like will help you to relate better with your actual clients because you will come from the same place, basically. Also, one thing that is interesting is that you will then potentially understand better how pricing work, because there's a lot of basically there's a lot of things going around that are completely like very crappy about like how things work and how you should be pricing things. And there's something very interesting is that as soon as you start seeing like invoices and talking with like your clients, but as like actual employers back in the days, is that you will sort of understand better how you can price your project and how your potential future work, so as a freelancer or studio, will sort of fit in all this hierarchy of fees, if I may say, in a project, which gives you like a more clever and more broader understanding of how basically a project is made, which is very important to have, because then actually you also get a better understanding of the whole process, so that maybe even if you work on competitions, then you know that you can start working also on like real estate development and how to sell projects that are just completely different type of work, basically. But this, you will get like a first-hand knowledge of it if you work and do some internships, for instance. Also, the idea of like if you do your 6th year, or at least in France, that's how it works, is that you get all the sort of like business management aspect in it. And here you will get, again, like some sort of first-hand knowledge on like pricing, how basically like an architecture firm works, and how your potential freelance gig or studio would fit in this sort of hierarchy, and how you can sort of make it work. So this is, I think, very valuable. The last category is called networking, and I think is by far the most important and hardest to get outside of architecture. What I mean by networking is that basically there's a lot of things that will happen through your studies that will help you to actually build relationships that you might be able to actually like extend beyond the 5 or 6 years that you've been working together, and sort of like transform into actual work. So one thing that is interesting, I think, and just in terms of network, is that by having and this is kind of retarded thinking, but still this is how it works, I think, is that having an architecture diploma will give you more credibility in the eye of your potential clients, because your potential clients are very likely to be architects. And as I've stated in the different categories earlier, there is kind of a type of understanding that stems from being in architecture that you will transfer into your images. And if you come from architecture, there's a high chance that you will be speaking on the same level. So this will be very likely that it helps you to find clients later on. So this idea of like credibility of having like the diploma is a good start in terms of networking. But the main thing that is interesting is that basically you will meet people, like whether it's students or tutors, and you will have a lot of things happening with that. Which the first thing is that basically you will learn how they work, how to work in team, how to sort of like expand your horizon and sort of like get interested in different types of topics and areas, etc. But the most important thing for your future, if I may say, is that they are like gonna be the base or like the foundations of your organic growth in the future. Because basically what happens that is very common is that the people that you befriend throughout the university are gonna later either work for companies or like different firms, maybe jump from firms to firms, etc., or they're gonna start their own. If they start their own and they like what you do, they will most likely come to you with like potential projects. And the other guys that are like more like jumping from firm to firm, if they like what you do and if you actually do good like images, they will most likely show your stuff to clients. And what is interesting is that then you will be much more quickly on top of the pile of potential partners. Because the problem is, not the problem, but like there's like two piles, if I may say. There's like cold calling where people are just completely outside of the network. And there's like this type of pile where it's like people from inside the company that actually say, oh, I know this guy. he does like good work, maybe you could work for him on like work with him on this project or whatever. The thing is, this type of scenario happens a lot, so it doesn't not prevent, but like dispense you from actually be like delivering good work and being like acting very professional, etc. Because in the same way that if you fuck up something, you're gonna burn your bridge and nobody is gonna like, at least the company is not gonna work with you again. Whether you enter like through cold emailing or like through proper referral, if you do like shitty work, people will not work with you again. But what is good is that basically it gives you like more weight in the potential, let's say, relationship. And they will also potentially make you visible to firms that you would not really access otherwise. Like I know that some of the big firms in Belgium that I've worked with, I would never really be in their radar. But since I had some friends working there, I managed to get like a good position there. And since I deliver good work, I've been working for them for several years now. So this is something that you really should pay attention, even though it's not like I'm saying this like as in retrospect. Even when I was doing like architecture for 5 years, I didn't have in mind that I would be doing archviz. So I wasn't like consciously thinking, sorry, I need to be friend with this guy because he does this, etc. But it's just like some sort of things that you need to have in mind. And actually, that's something that is very fun because it really expands. If you do good work, even people that just were from your year will know about you and will propose you to their employers, even if they didn't actually weren't actual friends and things like that, which shows you how important it is to be part of a sort of like small network and how the actual world of architecture is usually locally very small and sort of like restricted, so that it's, if you go to architecture school, you'll be in it and you'll have a sort of like a better starting point rather than if you're completely outside of it. Also, one last thing that I wanted to say regarding networking is that the funny thing is that the very first gig that I got as in archviz artist or like whatever was actually, I haven't even finished my year because I was doing it was while I was doing my graduation thesis, and I did renderings for a guy that was doing his last year as well, but he was like 30 years older than me and he just needed the paper, if I may say. So I did like images for him. So it was like my actual first paid gig as an archviz artist, even though I was still a student. So as you can see, there's like a lot of opportunity that will arise from the sort of small cosmos or whatever that's called, that is that an architecture school is. And it really, I think, I wasn't in the capital or whatever, like one of the best schools or whatever. It still happens in like even smaller architecture schools, I think. So this is something to keep in mind. And one of the, I think, asset in terms of like if you want to do archviz later, one of the things that is really valuable and very hard to get outside of architecture. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of schools in general, in the sense that they often feel to me as very antiquated and like standardized way of working and learning. And I'm sure there are like today ways of ways you can acquire this type of knowledge in less time and sort of like fast track it to a certain extent. But for some things, I think you just really can't replace it, especially as I was saying, the networking part is something you can't really do if you don't go through that way. You will struggle, I think, creating the same type of relationship by being outside of the sort of like architectural little bubble. So of course, it is entirely up to you to gauge like if you need to go to an architecture school or not. But in this video, what I wanted to emphasize is the sort of like type of knowledge you will most likely get by going there and how it sort of adds up to your archviz artist profile and make you more desirable for potential clients or employers if you don't want to run your own business. So it's really up to you to sort of like assess how you can create all of these maybe in different ways. But if not, maybe actually going to an architecture school could be a good way to like fast track this process. So this is it for this year. I hope you've enjoyed the video and enjoyed overall the content that I've put up this year. I've tried to be a bit more active and regular than in the past years. It for sure was fun, but there's a high chance that I will lower my production in the beginning of next year, since I already have many commissions in my pipeline, and also already I really need to finish and put together the masterclass, because there's like still a lot to do. I need to record everything, etc. But all the content is there, and it's going to be pretty fun, I think. And so I really want basically to be able to finish it and put it online so that you can all enroll if you're interested in the class. So yep, I hope you've enjoyed the video and that you will find some valuable stuff to get from there. And I'll probably see you next year. Enjoy your break. Cheers.